You made the point that the problem here is that people don't recognize is that the first and last result for the Arabs is always war. I think there's a problem with that. I think you might do well to recall the 1936 general strike conducted by Palestinians at the beginning of the revolt, which at the time was the longest recorded general strike in history. You may want to consult the book published last year by Laurie Allen, A History of False Hope, which discusses in great detail the consistent engagement by Palestinians, their leaders, their elites, their diplomats, and so on, with all these international committees. If we look at today, the Palestinians are once again going to the International Court of Justice. They're consistently trying to persuade the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court to do his job. They have launched widespread boycott campaigns. So, of course, the Palestinians have engaged in military resistance. But I think the suggestion that this has always been their first and last resort and that they have somehow spurned civic action, spurned diplomacy, I think really has no basis in reality.
I'll respond to that, and then a question for Norm to take into account, I think, when he answers Benny, because I am curious. Obviously, I have fresher eyes on this, and I'm a newcomer to this arena versus the three of you guys, for sure. A claim that gets brought up a lot has to do with the inevitability of transfer in Zionism, or the idea that as soon as the Jews envisioned a state in Palestine, they knew that it would involve some mass transfer of population, perhaps a mass expulsion. I'm sure we'll talk about Plan Dalet or Plan D at some point. The issue that I run into is, while you can find quotes from leaders, while you can find maybe desires expressed in diaries, I feel like it's hard to truly ever know if there would have been mass transfer in the face of Arab peace, because I feel like every time there was a huge deal on the table that would have had a sizable Jewish and Arab population living together, the Arabs would reject it out of hand. So, for instance, when we say that transfer was inevitable, when we say that Zionists would have never accepted, a sizable Arab population, how do you explain the acceptance of the 47 partition plan that would have had a huge Arab population living in the Jewish state? Is your contention that after the acceptance of that, after the establishment of that state, that Jews would have slowly started to expel all of these Arab citizens from their country? Or how do you explain that in Lausanne, a couple years later, that Israel was willing to formally annex the Gaza Strip and make 200,000 or so people those citizens? But I'm just curious, how do we get this idea of Zionism always means mass transfer when there were times, at least early on in the history of Israel and a little bit before it, where Israel would have accepted a state that would have had a massive Arab population in it? Is your idea that they would have just slowly expelled them afterwards, or
is that question to me or Norm?
Or to either one. I'm just curious for the incorporation of the answer. Yeah.
There's some misunderstandings here, so let's try to clarify them. Number one, it was the old historians who would point to the fact, in Professor Morris's terminology, the old historians, what he called not real historians, he called them chroniclers, not real historians. It was the old Israeli historians who denied the centrality of transfer in Zionist thinking. It was then Professor Morris who, contrary to Israel's historian establishment, who said, now you remind me it's 4 pages, but it came at the end of the book. It was
No, it's at the beginning of the book.
Transfer.
Yeah, transfer is dealt with in 4 pages at the beginning of my first book on the Palestinian refugee problem.
It's a fault of my memory, but the point still stands. It was Professor Morris who introduced this idea in what you might call a big way.
Yeah, but I didn't say it was central to the Zionist experiment or experience. You're saying centrality.
Okay.
I never said it was central. I said it was there, the idea.
By the way, it's okay to respond back and forth. This is great. And also just a quick question, if I may. Mm-hmm. You're using quotes from Benny, from Professor Morris. It's also okay to say those quotes do not reflect the full context of the. So, like, if we go back, to quotes we've said in the past, and you've both here have written, the three of you have written on this topic a lot, is we should be careful and just admit, that's
just real quick, just to be clear, the contention is that Norm is quoting a part and saying that this was the entire reason for this, whereas Benny's saying it's a part of the.
I'm not quoting a part. I'm quoting 25 pages where Professor Morris was at great pains to document the claim that appeared in those early 4 pages of his book. Now, you say it never became part of the official Zionist platform.
Never became part of policy.
Fine.
Fine.
It
wasn't policy.
We're also asked, well, this is true. Why did that happen? Why did that happen? It's because it's a very simple fact, which everybody understands. Ideology doesn't operate in a vacuum. There are real world practical problems. You can't just take an ideology and superimpose it on a political reality and turn it into a fact. It was the British mandate. There was significant Arab resistance to Zionism. And that resistance was based on the fact, as you said, the fear of territorial displacement and dispossession. So you couldn't very well expect the Zionist movement to come out in neon lights and announce, hey, we're going to be expelling you the first chance we get. That's not realistic.
Let me respond. Look, you've said it a number of times that the Arabs from fairly early on in the conflict, from the 1890s or the early 1900s, said the Jews intend to expel us. This doesn't mean that it's true. It means that some Arabs said this, maybe believing it was true, maybe using it as a political instrument to gain support to mobilize Arabs against the Zionist experiment. But the fact is, transfer did not occur before 1947. And Arabs later said, and since then, have said that the Jews want to build a third temple on the Temple Mount, as if that's what really the mainstream of Zionism has always wanted and always strived for. But this is nonsense. It's something that Husseini used to use as a way to mobilize masses for the cause, using religion as the way to get them to join him. The fact that Arabs said that the Zionists wanted to dispossess us doesn't mean it's true. It just means that some Arabs thought that, maybe said it sincerely and maybe insincerely.
Professor Morris.
Later it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is true.
Professor
because
Morris,
the Arabs attacked the Jews.
Professor Morris, I read through your stuff. Even yesterday, I was looking through Righteous Victim.
You should read other things. You're wasting your time.
No, actually, no. I do read other things, but I don't consider it a waste of time to read you. Not at all. You say that this wasn't inherent in Zionism. Now, would you agree that David Ben-Gurion was a Zionist?
A major Zionist leader.
Right. Would you agree Chaim Weizmann was a Zionist? Yeah. Okay. I believe they were. I believe they took their ideology seriously. It was the first generation. Just like with the Bolsheviks, the first generation was committed to an idea. By the 1930s, it was just pure realpolitik. The ideology went out the window. The first generation, I have no doubt about their convictions. Okay? They were Zionists. Transfer was inevitable and inbuilt in Zionism.
You keep repeating the same thing.
Because I have, as I said then, Mr. Morris, I have a problem reconciling what you're saying. It either was incidental or it was deeply entrenched. Here I read, it's deeply entrenched. Two very resonant words, inevitable and inbuilt.
Deeply entrenched, I never wrote.
Well, I'm not sure.
It's something you just invented.
Okay.
But
inevitable and inbuilt.
The idea of let me concede something.
No.
The idea of transfer was there. Israel Zangwill, a British Zionist, talked about it early on in the century. Even Herzl, in some way, talked about transferring population.
According to your 25 pages, everybody talked about it.
We keep bringing up this line from the 25 pages and the 4 pages. We're lucky to have Benny in front of us right now. We don't need to go to the quotes. We can legitimately ask, how central is expulsion to Zionism in its early version of Zionism, in whatever Zionism is today, and how much power, influence does Zionism and ideology have in Israel, and influence the philosophy, the ideology of Zionism have on Israel today?
The Zionist movement up to 1948, Zionist ideology was central to the whole Zionist experience, the whole enterprise up to 1948. And I think Zionist ideology was also important in the first decades of Israel's existence. Slowly, the hold of Zionism, if you like Bolshevism held the Soviet Union, gradually faded. And a lot of Israelis today think in terms of individual success and then the capitalism and all sorts of things which have nothing to do with Zionism. But Zionism was very important. But what I'm saying is that the idea of transfer wasn't the core of Zionism. The idea of Zionism was to save the Jews who had been vastly persecuted in Eastern Europe and, incidentally, in the Arab world, the Muslim world, for centuries, and eventually ending up with the Holocaust. The idea of Zionism was to save the Jewish people by establishing a state or re-establishing a Jewish state on the ancient Jewish homeland, which is something the Arabs today even deny, that there were Jews in Palestine or the land of Israel 2,000 years ago. Arafat famously said, what temple was there on Temple Mount? Maybe it was in Nablus, which of course is nonsense. But they had a strong connection for thousands of years to the land to which they wanted to return, and returned there. They found that on the land lived hundreds of thousands of Arabs, and the question was how to accommodate the vision of a Jewish state in Palestine alongside the existence of these Arab masses living on, who were indigenous, in fact, to the land by that stage. And the idea of partition, because they couldn't live together, because the Arabs didn't want to live together with the Jews, and I think the Jews also didn't want to live together in one state with Arabs in general. The idea of partition was the thing which the Zionists accepted. Okay, we can only get a small part of Palestine. The Arabs will get in 1937 most of Palestine. In 1947, the ratios were changed, but we can live side by side with each other in a partitioned Palestine. And this was the essence of it. The idea of transfer was there, but it was never adopted as policy. But in 1947-48, the Arabs attacked, trying to destroy essentially the Zionist enterprise and the emergent Jewish state. And the reaction was transfer in some way, not as policy, but this is what happened on the battlefield. And this is also what Ben-Gurion at some point began to want as well.